Hey there, it's Dr. Sarah here. Today on the She Found Motherhood podcast, I have the pleasure of chatting with Holly Choi from Safe Beginnings. Holly is a leader in infant and child safety in Canada and the co-owner of safebeginnings.ca. They offer infant safety and car seat safety online courses. Holly also shares an amazing amount of free information on her Instagram, Safe Beginnings. Today, Holly and I are talking about all things newborn safety, including newborn sleep and car seat safety. Before we get into that, I wanted to let you know that Holly has generously offered our listeners 20% off their online courses. Use the promo code SheFoundHealth and it will take you 20% off her courses. They offer online infant and child CPR, choking and injury prevention, and they also offer Getting It Right from Day One, car seat safety for baby's first year. We'll be sure to link their website and these promo codes in the show notes below. We'll get into the podcast with Holly right after this quick message. Welcome to the She Found Motherhood podcast. We are doctors Sarah and Alicia, maternity physicians and moms who have been through it all. We want to empower you with knowledge so you can have the best pregnancy, birth, and postpartum experience you can.
She Found Health and She Found Motherhood is meant for general medical information only. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. This information does not apply to every situation. If you have questions or if you've received different advice, please contact your healthcare provider. Always seek the advice of your physician or another qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. The views expressed by She Found Health and She Found Motherhood and our guests are not representative of any of the institutions with which we are affiliated. Some of our podcast episodes are sponsored so that we can keep getting great info out there to you, our listeners. We only partner with companies that we truly believe in. Some of our links and suggestions may be affiliates, and we would appreciate you using them to help fund this important work. Now let's get to it.
Good morning, Holly. Welcome to the She Found Motherhood podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited to connect with you and have you here and to have found you just across the way in North Vancouver.
I know, we're so close.
I know, it's so funny. And we just spent like 10 minutes chatting about all sorts of other random things. So, Holly, today we're going to talk about some safety stuff, but I thought maybe we could start by you just giving us a little bit of introduction about who you are and how you got into this line of work.
Yeah, so my name's Holly Choi. I am the co-owner of Safe Beginnings First Aid. We are a Vancouver-based first aid business. I co-own it with my sister Jill, who is a birth doula. And yeah, basically she had been running these classes. We teach infant CPR workshops. She'd been running them since about 2010. She'd had her first daughter. She recognized there was a need for it. And I had been working in medical software for a long time. The leap into first aid education just wasn't, an unlikely one. It really fit my talents. And so it was an exciting thing to do. I had a bit of a crisis, for lack of a better term, when I was pregnant. And I realized that my job really wasn't conducive to being there for my kids. And so I thought about what I could do to give myself more flexibility. And she invited me on board. We're a total safety nerd family. My dad was a health and safety guy. So it just kind of all made sense. And I had been in my previous career was a trainer. So for me, very quickly now we've become the leading provider of infant and toddler safety education in Canada. And with Instagram's help, we now have a huge audience across North America, which has been just really amazing to have a platform to share not just first aid information, but also just general injury prevention education as well. So it's been a really exciting last few years for us, but that's kind of who we are. My background, so I'm a first aid instructor with both the Lifesaving Society of BC and the Canadian Red Cross. I am an instructor for the Child Passenger Safety Association of Canada, which I always say is a long-winded way of saying I'm certified in car seats.
Yeah.
And I also sit on their national board of directors. And I have additional training through the International Association for Child Safety, so specifically around childproofing and injury prevention. So childproofing, car seat safety, and sort of general like infant, toddler first aid stuff is where I focus all of my energy.
Awesome. It's so important. I actually, as you're sharing all this, I'm thinking back, I did my master's in community health and epidemiology, and I looked at like accidental and unintentional injury, and it is it's one of the leading causes of like morbidity and mortality, quote unquote, which means like injury and death in youths.
Yeah, they between the ages of 1 and 14, motor vehicle collisions are the leading cause, yeah.
Yeah, it's awful, hey? So a really important topic for us to talk about and to educate new parents about, so they have it in their mind of how to keep their newborns and infants safe. So we were just going to have a sort of conversation about general safety tip for new parents, and so I will let you take it away and sort of share with us what you think most new parents should know.
Yeah, I think it's just really overwhelming becoming a new parent first and foremost, because there's so much information out there. And I'm sure, as you know, depending on who you're talking to, you get different perspectives and different information. And I think it's really important to take a step back and always think about someone's qualifications and where that information is coming from so that you're making really good informed choices.
Agree.
But in terms of newborn safety and new baby safety, there's a few things that I feel are really important for parents to know right off the bat. My first one is that newborns can roll. I think there is a huge misconception out there, people believing that newborns are incapable of rolling because they don't have the tone to do it. But unfortunately, it's not about tone. It's about the fact that they carry about 30% of their body weight in their head. So a movement of their head, their body can go with them. Or one that we'll often see is they'll lift their arm up like when they're laying on a change pad. Imagine lifting their arm like 90 degrees up into the air, and then their arm kind of takes them over.
Mhm.
And so there are a lot of cases where it's just physics, it's just leverage, and they can roll over. And from teaching our workshops in person over the years, I've often had parents come up to me after the workshop and say stuff like, my daughter rolled out of a Joey bed in the NICU. My son rolled off the weigh scale at the hospital. And so there's all these situations where they think they're so fresh, they can't possibly do that. So I just like to put out there, they totally can. And so for that reason, we have to consider that one of the leading causes of children going, well, specifically babies being hospitalized in Canada for an injury is from rolling off of an elevated surface.
Mhm.
So, my three pieces of advice around that are if you ever need to walk away from them, even if you're in the middle of a diaper change and you have them like smack dab in the middle of a king size bed, don't make the assumption. Either one, take them with you, two, stick them on the ground. It's
Mm.
such a common injury that now both the Canadian Pediatric Society, but really all the pediatric societies around the world suggest we change diapers on the ground if you can physically manage that.
Mhm.
And then option three is just put them somewhere else, right? So someone else's arms, a crib, a bassinet, whatever, but something that will contain them for you. Now, there's no harm to changing a baby on an elevated change pad. There's nothing wrong with that inherently, but it's that lack of supervision or that assumption that if we step away for a moment that they're going to stay there. So using straps on change pads is very important, but we still can't walk away. All the strap on the change pad is really there to do is give you enough freedom to take one hand off a baby so that you can grab a wiper diaper that's immediately next to you. I also had, it was really funny because I had this grandma in my class and she was laughing hysterically as she was telling me this. And I think part of it was she's blacked out the trauma of the situation. But she told me a story about how, like back in the 80s, she was changing her daughter on a change pad. And she thought, if I have my body pressed up against this change pad and she rolls, where is she going to roll to?
Yeah.
Probably my abdomen. So she took her hands off with this thought process in her head. And her daughter kicked her feet off the change pad and actually went off the short end of the dresser. So not toward her, but
Oh my
the
god.
other way. And she's laughing as she's saying this. And I'm like, where's that story going? And there was a laundry hamper there, but she landed it.
Oh,
So, like, very fortunate
yeah.
placement of the laundry hamper.
Mm.
But it just goes to illustrate the point that, sometimes we don't fully understand what they're capable of.
Mhm.
And she really did not believe that her child would launch herself off the other end of the dresser. So, just things to be mindful of. One hand on, do it on the ground. Those are my big things.
Yeah, yeah, and I always say, like, get everything you need, right? Get the wipes, and, like, I try and encourage parents to just use, like, a warm washcloth with water instead of the wipes all the time. And so, like, getting all that ready so you don't need to step away to grab anything. I know one of my kids definitely rolled off the change table. I think my first it wasn't me, not like your guys, but I was downstairs and I heard it, and it was really traumatizing. He was fine. We did end up taking him to the hospital because every time we tried to make him stand up, I can't remember how old he was, but he wouldn't put weight on one of his feet, and not weight bearing is a concern for, infants and toddlers. So, and he ended up being fine, but it happens, right?
Yeah, whenever I bring it up in a class, I'll usually see a wave of guilt wash across
Yeah.
the room for the people that have their kids on the outside. And I immediately follow that statement with, this happens to almost every parent one. So know that you're not the one person
Yeah.
that did this. It's just that if we have the opportunity to address that
Yeah.
before a child is in their life, the better outcome we'll have, right? So
Totally.
if you're listening to this and you're like, I did that, know that you're not alone. It's happened to most of us.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Hey, Sarah, do you remember all of those questions you had as a new mom? What car seat should I buy? How do I start solids with my baby? Do I cloth diaper or use disposables? How do I care for my newborn skin? And what kind of birth control should I use postpartum?
I sure do. I know for me, one of my hugest supports postpartum was my network of mom friends who had been through it themselves or were going through it with me. The sleep deprivation, the breastfeeding challenges, the baby blues, you name it.
Agree. The support of a community that you know and trust and has been through the challenges of postpartum or is going through them with you is so important.
That's why we created the nesting community. I'm so excited to build this community. Alicia, why don't you tell our listeners what it's all about?
I would love to. We're teaming up with Dr. Pip from Making Mama Well to build the nesting community to help you prepare for the fourth trimester and beyond. Are you wanting more information on how to prepare? Feeling anxious about all the different options and what to choose? Are you looking for a group of like-minded mamas for support and to lean on each other during this challenging but amazing season of your life?
We'll be having monthly guest experts covering topics from baby wearing to breastfeeding challenges, from postpartum contraception to return to work planning.
So come on over and join us at www.shefoundhealth.ca. We can't wait to see you in the nesting community. Check out the link in our show notes below.
Okay, anything else we should think about with newborns?
Yeah. So another one is just that when babies, well, and also toddlers, when they're really young, they have very thin skin. Their skin is still a developing organ. It is a lot thinner and a lot more sensitive than even just a slightly older child's skin. And so that makes them significantly more likely to burn and burn quicker and burn deeper. So we have to be very cautious when it comes to not just things like the sun, but also just other stuff around the home that's hot.
Mhm.
And one of the leading ways that babies are burned is from hot drinks. So if we forget a mug of coffee or tea on the coffee table and they, are curious and they pull it down, or one that's especially common with like non-mobile babies, like newborns through crawling age, is parents holding a child in their arms on the couch while drinking a hot drink or wearing them in a carrier, maybe going for a walk, getting a coffee, and we accidentally spill something on them. So, my advice to parents around this, well, really any caregivers in this situation, is please, if you can, try to drink out of travel mugs when you're around small kids because it makes it less likely for it to spill. If they tip it over, there's a little bit more of a barrier. So even if it does leak out a bit, it's not the amount of an open cup. And it just gives you just a little extra layer of protection in that situation. Stuff happens all the time, but if we can build in little extra layers of protection to just try to prevent that from being a possibility or make it significantly less horrible, then we'll do it, right? So travel mugs are awesome. I recommend if you're looking for travel mugs, try to find ones that have what are called an auto seal mechanism, meaning typically you have to like press a button to drink out of it. And then when you're not pressing the button, it seals itself.
Mhm.
Those tend to prevent burns significantly better than other styles. Travel mugs that have like a flip top to drink out of or a sliding top. Oftentimes the lids will pop off easily of those, and especially if they get knocked over or dropped, right? Yeah. I worked with a mom a few years ago who she was just she had a new baby and she had a toddler that she was trying to get their shoes on, which is a very common situation for parents to deal with right now.
Yeah.
And she's holding the baby, she's holding her coffee, and she dropped it, trying to juggle everything that she was trying to do. And she fortunately like just missed her toddler with it. And in that moment, she was like, you know what? I'm gonna go try to find a mug that doesn't
Yeah.
do that. So if you can find something that's auto seal, it's just a great way to avoid that from happening.
Yeah, that's a great tip. I hadn't thought about that and the auto seal. I'm like racking my brain where I could get one of those.
Yeah. Well, my personal favorite, I'm not paid to say this. My personal favorite is a Contigo brand mugs. They
Yeah.
have one called the West Loop, which I think is probably the best one that I've ever come across. But they sell those all across North America. So pretty much anywhere you can buy any kind of insulated mug, it will be on the shelf.
Oh yeah, they have them at Costco a lot of the time, right?
They're usually
Yeah.
cheapest at
Yep.
Costco. Yeah.
Not sponsored, guys. Not sponsored.
Not fun, not fun. My other really big one in this section is avoiding placing soft items in their sleep space.
Mhm.
So, under the age of 12 months, we want to try to avoid having anything kind of plush or soft in their sleep space. So, that's things like blankets that they could pull up near their face, pillows, stuffed animals. This can be a really challenging one for some parents, and especially if you've got more than one kid. They love to like pass things around, try to help out their sibling. But we want to avoid that stuff because we know that that can contribute to SIDS risk. The other issue, I think, with some of the soft things that a lot of people don't realize, even moving past the 12-month mark, is kids will use them for leverage. So if you put, let's say that you introduce like a teddy bear, or realistically, by the time a child gets stuffed animals, they don't just have one with them. They have 30 of them in their space. They can pile them up and they can use it as a way to kind of climb out of stuff too. So it's something to be really mindful of. But under 12 months, just try to keep everything as bare as you can in their sleep space so that we can avoid them sometimes even just accidentally rolling into something or pulling something up near their face.
Yeah, I never thought of that, using it for leverage. I'm lucky. I never had none of my kids. I have 3 boys and none of them tried to escape from their cribs, but I could definitely see how that would happen. Yeah. And this is a hard one. We counsel parents around this too. And also, a lot of people co-sleep, as I'm sure you're aware. So my approach is always like harm reduction. Like I say, like this is what we recommend, and all the harm reduction things like firm mattress, no heavy blankets, no, like if you're going to do that, put the mattress on the floor. I don't know if you can speak to that at all, because my concern is that when we say do this and don't give a safe alternative, it's not really fair for the parents. Sleep is a really controversial topic for infants and newborns.
Yeah, there's some really harsh messaging around this.
Mhm.
And I've even found that there's some what I would consider medium messaging that still comes across kind of harsh. My perspective on this is that we have to also be considerate of other people's cultures.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of cultures around the world where they do this and they do it safely. And that's often things like if we think of like the Western bed. So like in North America, we sleep in these big plush beds.
Mhm.
But if you look to even cultures like Japan, a lot of them still actually sleep on the floor. Like that's a totally normal thing.
Totally.
And so if you think about that, that's fine. Like that's totally fine. And so I think, especially for those of you that are listening to this that are in British Columbia, we have really interesting public health guidelines because a lot of places like the US, for example, it's just a black and white, no, that's what it is. No, we don't do it. And what I found really interesting is in 2017, Perinatal Services BC updated their sleep guidelines and they started including messaging around bed sharing. And just to say, like, look, we know this is happening. We know we're not going to change everyone's mind. And if this is something that you're going to do, here are ways to lessen the risk in your situation. And I think that that's important because if we go around shaming everyone, saying,
Yeah.
"No, don't do it. You're going to make a horrible choice." I understand the perspective of the people that are giving out that messaging, but at the same time, if we are going to give such a harsh message, it causes people to go underground and then they're not seeking informed education on it. So I really respect that about our guidelines in BC because it does open up a conversation that can lead to having people make really strong choices and also respecting other people's cultures, which I think is just a beautiful Canadian perspective that
Totally.
we have here. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm glad you said that because that's always the example I give. And people are like, well, they bed share all over the world. And I'm like, yes. And they do it in a very, like, they don't have a king size plush mattress with big pillows and a big comforter. And I was terrified because we have a really soft mattress. I was always terrified, right? Because the concern is, when you put your hand down to like push yourself up on a soft mattress, indentation, infant can,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Totally.
and that's what I always tell parents. I'm like, get a firm mattress and put it on the floor. Right?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
if you're wanting to bed share. So for those of you in BC or for those of you that are interested, you can check out I'm sure they can just Google the guidelines, right?
Yeah, if you Google perinatal services, safe infant sleep, that is the name of the document. And it's a really beautiful illustrated document. There's two of them. There's one that's aimed at healthcare providers, but it's very accessible for the average person to read. It's not full of jargon. That one's about 4 pages of illustration and explaining where the risks are and how to mitigate them. And they also have a parent facing document, which I think is about 2 pages, but again, really illustrated and beautiful. There's another really lovely illustration in there that explains why children are safer on their back versus otherwise. And I will often have grandparents in classes with me say stuff like, well, we put them to sleep on their side. And I explain to them, that doesn't necessarily mean everyone had a great outcome, of course, right? Things happen. That's why we make changes.
Mhm.
But it also just shows the alignment of a child's esophagus versus a child's trachea when they are on their back and when they're on their front. And it's just such a wonderful visual that if you end up in a conversation with someone and they're like, well, you're wrong, I'm right. It's a document that really covers all of it and explains everything so clearly that you can just have an open conversation with someone.
No, that's great. Yeah, I'll make sure that I put that I'm, like, reminding myself here that I put the link to that in the show notes too, so people could just easily access it. Something else, moving on from sleep and back to vehicles, you mentioned that motor vehicle collisions are one of the leading causes of death and disability probably for children. What do you have any sort of safety tips around, driving car seats and that type of thing for newborns and infants?
Yeah, so I always say it seems weird when I talk about car seats because I'll often when I introduce myself, I often use the words I'm passionate about car seats, and people kind of look at me like that's a weird thing. It's like
Okay.
saying you're passionate about baby monitors, but no, I really am. I took my CPST training course in 2015. It was I have to do math in my head, and my daughter was 2 months old, and I took it out of boredom. Again, I mentioned earlier, my sister is a birth doula. A lot of birth doulas take CPST training just to kind of add another service to their portfolio that they can help their clients with. And she had organized a class and with a lot of her doula friends. And she said, why don't you come along? Since we're, doing first aid together now, it might be a good thing we can talk about in our classes. I was like, sure, why not? I was 2 months postpartum. I was really bored at home. When your baby doesn't talk to you, it can get quite lonely. So I thought, wow, if I can bring my baby to this class, yeah, I'm gonna go. So I go to the class and I'm just thinking, this seems like such a scam. Like read the manual, follow the instructions. How hard can this be? So I walk into it with this attitude of, I don't know if I'm going to learn anything. I left the first night of the class. It's a 3-day class. I left the class in tears. And keep in mind, I was 8 weeks postpartum. So a lot of that was probably just hormones. But everywhere I could have made a mistake with my daughter's car seat, I made it. And I couldn't believe how easy it was to make car seat mistakes and how confident I was that I wasn't making them going into that. And so for me, it was really this awakening of, wow, here I am wanting to do the best thing for my child, believing I'm doing the best thing, and then having someone tell me, no, actually, you're totally screwing this up.
Mhm.
And it was hard for me to hear it. But I went in the next day like, okay, I'm going to get this right. I'm going to get this right. I'm going to figure out how to do this. And then I'm going to make sure that I have a way to help other people get this information. So again, back to what we were saying about the leading cause of death related to unintentional injury for children between 1 and 14. We note that information, but also the Canadian Pediatric Society did a study and they found 81% of car seats are misused. So
Wow.
validating for me in that scenario, knowing that it wasn't just me,
Yeah.
but also if you step back and you think about that statistic, there's one thing that can save our kids from the thing that's taking them from us, and we're not using them properly. So after I took that training, I had a fire under my butt and I was volunteering any second I got to help parents get their car seats installed properly. And I will tell you, in the nearly now 6 years I have been doing that, I haven't seen even close to 10% used correctly at all.
Wow.
And I always say, no one does that on purpose. No one's like, oh, I'm going to go endanger my child today. No, no one does that. But it's so easy to make those mistakes. And most of it is because every single car seat's different.
Oh my
They
God.
all
Right?
their own little weird sets of rules. And a car seat really can only protect a child if you follow all of its rules to a T, because it's how the seat was engineered and it's how the seat was crash tested. So, the example that I like to give with this is infant car seats, the ones that have a carry handle.
Hmm.
Every infant car seat has a rule about where that handle has to be locked in place when you're driving. Some of them ask you to leave it upright. Some of them, like, for example, for those of you in Canada that are listening, in Canada, the Upper Baby Mesa handle has to go towards the child's feet. And for other seats, like the Peg Perego infant seats, they ask you to put the handle all the way back past the child's head, like in line with the shell. And so every single seat's different, and you'll often see your friend do something else. They might say to you, "No, it's supposed to go here." And that's how a lot of misinformation happens, is they know it's true about
Tip-
their seat,
Yeah.
and then they go rid of someone else.
Yeah.
And the reason that every car seat has a different rule and is so specific, that's where it has to be. That's where the handle was when the seat passed crash testing. And so sometimes I think a lot of these rules feel really arbitrary.
Mm-hmm.
And my message is, please know that they are there for a reason and they are really, really important. The main problem that I see on a daily basis, and I'm sure you have noticed this as well, is people just not harnessing children correctly.
Yeah.
There's a lot more to it than people realize, but there's also rampant misinformation out there. Please hear me out. You're welcome to plead the fifth if you want. Most of this happens at the hospital. And it's because most of our health authorities just haven't updated their car seat policies in a really, really long time. So, one of the main pieces of misinformation that I hear, well, there's two really. One is that using two fingers to check for tightness. We really haven't done that in over a decade, because if you were to compare my fingers to someone else's fingers, we're not going to get the same answer. The other is infant inserts being removed just right away out of car seats, um, without looking up what the rules are, why that infant insert maybe should be there in a lot of cases. And I like to say really clearly, it's not the fault of maternity nurses who do that. It's the fault of our health authorities for just not updating their policies. And one of the things that we work on the board of directors for the Child Passenger Safety Association of Canada, is advocating for things like that to be changed. But as with anything in healthcare, there's levels of bureaucracy, and a lot of that stuff has to come from Transport Canada, and then has to get filtered down through the health authority and then get filtered down to the hospitals and boiled down to policy. So I just like to say, please know that not always, just because someone's in a particular role, it doesn't necessarily mean they're qualified to give you that information, but they also might just be obligated to, and might be obligated to tell you something because it's policy, whether it's true or not. And so it's not their fault. Okay. But my request is, please get your car seats checked by someone who's certified. So in Canada, you can do that by going to cpsac.org, cpsac.org/find a tech. And you can find anyone across Canada that's certified that can help you. The majority of us will operate as volunteers, and we make sure that you have your car seat installed correctly, that it's used correctly. And then if you have questions, we'll answer them for you. But please make sure that you spend time to get your car seat checked and just know that you're doing it correctly. And we are a very non-judgmental group of volunteers. We want to help you, and then you'll feel confident knowing that you're doing the right thing for your child.
Yeah, that's so helpful. And you know what's interesting is you're saying that when I had my, I don't know, I think my oldest, who's now 7.5, the nurses did check his car seat. And now they don't. They say we are not qualified. They
That's
just
awesome.
fix the expiry date. And and it's great, right? And I didn't realize every car seat was different. We had the Chico Keep It, I think, and it lasted through all of our kids, which was great. It was very simple, right? I had an infant insert and I knew the weight to take it out, but you're saying the handle thing, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't think I ever read where the handle was supposed
The
to
good news is that it's upright for that seat, so you were
go.
probably okay.
Really helpful to know. And I'll make sure I put that link in the show notes below because I think that's something that we as maternity providers should be educating all our patients and our new parents is to go and get that done before you go to the hospital, right? You can get it checked,
Yeah.
make sure it's installed correctly, make sure you know where the handle goes, make sure you know when to use the infant insert. And the other thing is the arm straps, right? Because they're different for, I think they're different for newborns than they are for older kids, right?
Yeah, so when we're rear facing, we always want them to kind of dip behind the shoulder. I always say it should look like a backpack. And when we have children forward facing down the road, it will come from above the shoulder, much like our seatbelt floats above our shoulders. So there are so many little adjustments over
Totally.
time. Just find someone that'll help you out with it. It doesn't take very long, and we just want to help you.
Yeah. What was that website again? CPS.
CPSAC.org/find a tech.
Okay, I'll put that in. So, Holly, you have shared with us some incredible safety tips. We talked about newborns can roll from momentum and physics, not necessarily from their tone and their physical abilities. So, really be mindful when you're changing a baby or, you're leaving a baby, do not do it on a high surface. Be mindful of their skin and with burns particularly. And guys, one of my kids have had burns, right? Like I'm like, check, check. These are all, and we're a dual physician family. So please, if this has happened to you, don't feel guilty. And the other thing with newborn skin is it's just, I always tell people like it's terrible, right? It's so sensitive. It's always flaking. It's always, so just be mindful. Their skin is a growing organ. We talked about safe sleep and we'll link the guidelines, the Perinatal Services BC, because I think that will be helpful for anybody, even if they're not in BC, because it really is non-judgmental and it talks about bed sharing, which we know many people do, and we want you to do it as safely as possible. And then motor vehicle collisions and car seat safety. So you are a wealth of information. Where can people go to learn more from you? And can you tell us a little bit about the courses that you offer?
Yes. So our main website is safebeginnings.ca. We offer our main course is a 2-hour infant child CPR choking and injury prevention workshop. We offer that both online and as well in person if you are in the greater Vancouver area. We also occasionally dip over to Vancouver Island and the Okanagan. So keep an eye out for that if you are in those areas. I also do CPST training. So I certify new child passenger safety technicians. And we have a few sort of niche courses, including courses for birth doulas and for other sort of caregivers. So we've got a lot of things to check out on our website. My main resource that I use sort of for continuing education, specifically around injury prevention, is my Instagram account, which is just Safe Beginnings. And I always say I yell about child safety there all week long. I consider myself to be intense. Other people tell me that I'm delicate, but I always feel like I'm yelling. But if you're not sick of hearing my voice, that's a great place to check out and just stay up to date on the latest in child safety.
Oh, absolutely. And I cannot encourage new parents more to do those safety courses. I had an experience where I had just finished medical school and I get like almost palpitations thinking about this story. I was at a barbecue at my cousin's house. So I had two cousins. And one of them had I think she probably was a toddler at the time, her daughter. And she was eating crackers and running around. And she started to choke. And so my cousin pat her on the back. And then all of a sudden she was like obstructed. And everyone looked at me because I had just graduated medical school. And I like instinctively picked her up and out the cracker came. And I was just like, that adrenaline, right? And if I had not known what to do, and that sticks with me, right? That experience. Like think about all the experiences we've had in our lives and I still get goosebumps. And If you can be that person for your children, for someone else's child, if you know what to do, you can save a life.
Yeah, it's so important that everyone just has some life-saving skills for their family. I think one of the things that really sets us apart is we never teach a class under 2 hours. And part of the reason for that is we want to make sure that we're really thorough in what we do so that we cover every situation. We also teach skills for adults because the skills for children are really modifications of the adult skill.
Mhm.
So we will always start with an adult skill, modify it for a child, and then modify it for an infant. We also talk about skills for pregnant people because we get
Yes.
a lot of people that see us before a child's born and then what if they choke? Right? So it's really just good to have skills for the whole family. And then that way if something happens, you're all there to help each other. And it's always better to just have it. I like to call it an insurance policy.
Mhm.
Hopefully you'll never use it, but if you've got it, that muscle memory will kick in for you.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Holly. I'll link everything in the show notes below, you guys. And it's been a total pleasure. I would love to connect with you again about there's so many other things we could talk about, right?
I know I can talk for hours.
Water safety, all of that. So I'm sure we will again. Thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening. Make sure to check out our website at www.shefoundhealth.ca and to sign up for our community for weekly bump blasts. Make sure to check us out on Instagram or Facebook at she.found.motherhood and head on over to your favorite podcast app and leave a review and a 5-star rating. If you enjoyed this podcast, take a pic of yourself listening to it and share it on social. Make sure to tag us on it so we know to keep making them.